Now that we know how to simplify a rational expression, we can expand our knowledge to include multiplying and dividing rational expressions. Remember that a rational expression is simply a fraction that has a polynomial on top and a polynomial on bottom. So when I say that we're going to multiply and divide them, it really means we're multiplying and dividing fractions. So we're going to have to rely on some skills that we learned in elementary and middle school, which is just how to multiply a fraction. We're going to combine that with a little bit of Math 3 skill, which is the factoring portion of it. Step number 1, similar to simplifying, is that we are going to factor. Unfortunately, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 things to factor as opposed to just 2. So I'm going to take the top of the first fraction. Again, if you need help with factoring, that's a different lesson. I am under the assumption that you do know how to factor if you're on this lesson. If not, come find me and we will do what we can to help you with that. Alright, so I've taken the top. It's not a trinomial, so I will not be doing add and multiply. So I check to see if it has a greatest common factor. Be careful on this one, it is a little tricky. You can probably see that there's a 4 in common, but in addition to the 4, there's also an x. So you can take out a number and a variable. That is possible. So if I take out the 4 and the x, those 4's will go away. I had 2 x's, I'm taking 1 away, that leaves 1. Over here can be a bit tricky because you see 4x divided by 4x and you want to say, oh, well that just cancels out, let me put a 0. That's not true. Anytime you have something that is itself divided by itself, it simplifies down to become a 1. So 4x divided by 4x, that position will be held with a 1. So I have finished factoring the top, and I will refer back to that in just a minute. Continuing to factor, I'm going to do the bottom of the first fraction. This one is a trinomial. It does not have a greatest common factor. It is a trinomial. So I'm looking to see what multiplies to be negative 3 and adds to be 2. You can play around with it. Hopefully, after playing around with it, you will get positive 3 and negative 1. And that's the bottom factor. Now, that is unfortunately only the first fraction. I have to go back over here and work on the second fraction now. I'll do that work over here. So if I take the top, x squared plus x minus 6, there is no greatest common factor, but it is a trinomial. So I will consider what multiplies to be negative 6, but adds to be 1. You should end up with positive 3 and negative 2 as your choices. The bottom of that second fraction is just 4x. There's not much to do with that. It does not have a greatest common factor. It is not a trinomial. So honestly, we're just going to leave that alone. Okay, I'm going to change colors so that you can definitely see where I'm pulling from. So this is my fraction over here, and these are my factors of this fraction, so let's put them back together. Oops, let me try again. 4x times x minus 1 was the top of this fraction, and x plus 3, x minus 1 was the bottom, times, over here I had x plus 3 and x minus 2 over 4x. So, factored the top, factored the bottom. Factored the top, factored the bottom. That's a lot of information to keep up with. Don't be afraid to use a lot of paper. Spread your work out and then pull it back together. So, now that we've done a really nice job factoring, how do I simplify? Similar to how you did it earlier. Anytime you have a factor on the top and the bottom, it's going to cancel. So I think the x minus 1 is pretty easy to see. One thing I do want to tell you is that it's okay to cross fractions. So for example, you might see this plus 3 here and this plus 3 here. They are in different fractions, but as long as one is in the bottom and one is in the top, it is allowable that they cancel. Same thing with the 4x's. As long as one is in the top and one is in the bottom, we can cancel them out. Apparently I don't have a whole lot left. The only thing it seems I have left is the x minus 2, so that would be the answer to my question. So what about dividing? Okay, so now that we know how to multiply, how does dividing make it different? There is a trick to division. You technically cannot divide fractions. You can only multiply by their reciprocals. So we're going to do a technique before we start that I call KFC. The K stands for keep. Keep the first fraction the same. X minus 3 over x squared minus 5x minus 14. So that's keep. F stands for flip. We're going to flip the second fraction upside down. The bottom becomes the top, and the top becomes the bottom. The C stands for change. We're going to change this division sign to become a multiplication sign. So, recall you cannot actually divide fractions. So if you see a fraction divided by a fraction, you have to perform KFC. Keep, flip, change. Well, now it's just a multiplication problem, so I have to remember how I did the previous example. In short, I'm going to factor and cancel. In this fraction, if I take the top out, or take the top off, x minus 3 does not factor. We're going to keep that the same. The bottom does factor. It is a trinomial. So what multiplies to be negative 14 but adds to be negative 5? You should get negative 7 and positive 2. That's my left fraction. On my right, the x minus 7 is not going to factor. There is no greatest common factor. It is not a trinomial. I don't have a whole lot of choices there. As far as the bottom is concerned, it is a trinomial. What multiplies to be negative 6 but adds to be negative 1? You should find that negative 3 and positive 2 will do it. Now I realize that factoring was probably faster than you could do it. But again, I'm not really teaching you factoring, I'm teaching you what to do after factoring. Now that we've done that, let's pull it back together. This is now x minus 3 over x minus 7x plus 2 times, the top here is still x minus 7, but the bottom has been factored. I know that I'm doing well if things start canceling. I'm going to check. I have an x minus 3 here and an x minus 3 here. One is on top, one is on bottom, so I can cancel. I have an x minus 7 here and an x minus 7 here. One is on top, one is on bottom, so I can cancel. Be careful with these. It is tempting to want to cancel them out, but they're both in the bottom. You cannot cancel it out unless one is in the top and one is in the bottom. So we're going to keep them both in the bottom, and we're going to make sure they stay in the bottom by putting a 1 in the top. And that is how to divide and multiply rational expressions.